The blood dripping from Daisy Miller's split lip painted a crimson trail across the wooden floorboards of the modest cabin she'd called home for the past 2 years. It wasn't the first time her husband Frank's heavy hand had found her face, but something in her spirit had finally snapped like a dry twig underfoot. The year was 1876, and in the rugged terrain of Wyoming Territory, a woman's choices were few, but Daisy had decided she would rather face the wilderness than spend another night beneath the same roof as the man who had promised to cherish her. "I told you to have my supper ready," Frank roared, his whiskey-soured breath hot against her cheek as he grabbed her by the hair. "What kind of wife refuses to cook for her husband?" Daisy's eyes, clear as mountain springs despite the bruising around her left one, stared back defiantly. "I won't do it anymore, Frank. Not tonight. Not ever again." The second blow came harder than the first, sending her sprawling across the room. As she pulled herself up, tasting copper and salt, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that if she stayed until morning, she might not see another sunset. With Frank collapsed in a drunken stupor by the hearth, she gathered what little she could carry: a change of clothes, the silver locket from her mother, and the small pouch of coins she'd secretly saved from selling eggs at the general store. The night was moonless and cold when Daisy slipped away from the cabin, her thin shawl providing little protection against the October chill. She had no destination in mind beyond away from Frank's fists, away from the isolation that had allowed his cruelty to flourish unchecked. The wilderness stretched before her, vast and indifferent, but somehow less frightening than the 4 walls she was leaving behind. By dawn, Daisy's feet were blistered inside her worn boots, and her stomach twisted with hunger. The rolling landscape offered little shelter, but she pressed on, following what appeared to be a cattle trail heading south. If she could reach the small settlement of Pine Creek, perhaps 20 miles distant, she might find work or passage farther away. The sun had climbed high in the sky when Daisy spotted dust rising in the distance. Her first instinct was to hide. What if Frank had sobered up and come looking for her? But her legs were too weary to carry her off the trail, and soon the approaching riders would see her regardless. As the figures drew closer, Daisy could make out 3 men on horseback, driving a small herd of cattle. Her heart pounded against her ribs like a trapped bird, but she straightened her back and continued walking. She would not cower on the roadside like a frightened animal. The lead rider, a tall man with sun-bronzed skin beneath the shadow of his wide-brimmed hat, raised his hand to signal his companions to slow as they approached. Daisy could feel his eyes taking in her disheveled appearance, the bruises blooming on her face, the dried blood on her collar. "Madam," he called, his voice carrying easily across the distance between them. "You appear to be in some trouble." Daisy lifted her chin, wincing at the pain that shot through her jaw. "I'm just traveling to Pine Creek, sir. I'd appreciate being left to my business." The man dismounted in one fluid motion, keeping a respectful distance as he removed his hat. His hair was the color of wheat, and his eyes, Daisy noticed with surprise, were kind despite their wariness. "Name's Zachary Blackwood," he said. "These are my men. We're moving cattle to the railroad at Pine Creek." He gestured to his companions, who remained mounted, watching the exchange with curiosity. "It's not safe for a lady to be walking these parts alone. There are coyotes, outlaws, and worse." "I've already met worse," Daisy replied, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. Zachary's gaze lingered on her injuries, and something like anger flickered across his features before being carefully contained. "I won't pry into your affairs, madam, but I can't in good conscience leave you out here. We've got a wagon following behind with supplies. If you're headed to Pine Creek, perhaps you'd consider riding with us. You'd be doing me a service. Actually, my cook burned his hand something fierce yesterday, and I've got hungry men to feed." Daisy stiffened. "I'm not looking to cook for any man." Zachary raised his hands in a placating gesture. "I'm not asking you to, madam, just offering safe passage to town. My men and I can fend for ourselves when it comes to grub, though I can't promise it'll be anything worth eating." Something in his manner, the careful distance he maintained, the lack of demand in his offer, made Daisy reconsider. The prospect of walking another 15 miles on her blistered feet was daunting, and these men, rough as they appeared, seemed honorable enough. "Very well," she said after a moment's consideration. "I accept your offer of transport to Pine Creek, Mr. Blackwood, but I want to be clear I'm not seeking employment or charity." Zachary nodded, replacing his hat. "Understood, madam. The supply wagon should be along shortly. Would you care for some water while we wait?" The water from Zachary's canteen was cool and sweet, and Daisy drank gratefully, suddenly aware of how parched she had become. When the supply wagon arrived, driven by a young man hardly old enough to shave, Zachary helped clear a space among the crates and canvas bags. "This is Daisy," Zachary told the youth. "She's traveling to Pine Creek. Daisy, this is Tommy, our wrangler in training." The boy tipped his hat nervously, his eyes widening at the sight of Daisy's bruised face before quickly looking away. "Pleased to meet you, madam." As the wagon began to move again, Daisy felt a strange mixture of relief and trepidation. She was still heading into uncertainty, but at least she was no longer alone on the trail. The cattle drive moved at a deliberate pace, and Daisy found herself lulled by the rhythmic creaking of the wagon. Tommy proved to be a respectful companion, sharing stories of life on the range without asking questions about her circumstances. By late afternoon, when Zachary called for the drive to halt and make camp for the night, Daisy had learned that the Blackwood outfit was a small but successful operation, and that Zachary had a reputation for fair dealing. The men set about making camp with practiced efficiency, unsaddling horses, gathering firewood, setting up a basic cook area. Daisy sat on a fallen log at the edge of the activity, uncertain of her place in this temporary community. Zachary approached, carrying a tin cup of coffee. "It's not the finest brew, but it's hot," he said, offering it to her. "Thank you," Daisy murmured, wrapping her fingers around the warm metal. "The cook I mentioned, Hank, he's back at the ranch with his burned hand. The men are attempting to put together something resembling supper." Zachary glanced over his shoulder at the chaotic scene around the campfire. "I fear we may all go hungry tonight." "I could," Daisy began, then stopped herself. She had vowed not to fall back into the role of serving men, yet these cowboys had shown her nothing but kindness. Zachary seemed to sense her conflict. "You're our guest, Miss Daisy. We'll manage." As the sun began to set, painting the sky in vivid oranges and pinks, Daisy watched the cowboys' increasingly frustrated attempts to prepare a meal. One man cursed as he burned his fingers on the cast-iron skillet, while another managed to spill half a bag of beans into the dirt. Finally, unable to bear it any longer, Daisy stood and approached the campfire. "If you gentlemen wouldn't mind," she said, loud enough to be heard over their bickering, "I could assist with the cooking. Not because I'm obligated to, but because I'd prefer not to go hungry tonight." The cowboys looked at her with expressions ranging from relief to embarrassment. One of them, a burly man with a thick mustache, stepped away from the fire with a grateful nod. "Much obliged, madam. I can rope a steer at full gallop, but I'm useless with a skillet." Daisy surveyed the supplies they had laid out: beans, salt pork, coffee, and a few withered potatoes. It wasn't much, but she could work with it. As she began to prepare the simple meal, she was conscious of Zachary watching her from across the camp, his expression unreadable in the gathering dusk. When the food was ready, a hearty stew of beans and pork with pan bread on the side, the men lined up with their tin plates, thanking Daisy with genuine appreciation. She served herself last and was about to find a quiet spot to eat when Zachary approached again. "Would you care to join me?" he asked, gesturing to a place by the fire. Daisy hesitated, then nodded, following him to a log that had been positioned as a makeshift bench. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Zachary spoke. "That was mighty kind of you to help with the cooking, considering your stance on the matter." Daisy set her plate on her lap. "There's a difference between being forced to serve and choosing to contribute," she said quietly. "I appreciate that you understand the distinction." Zachary nodded, his eyes reflecting the dancing flames of the campfire. "My mother taught me that respect isn't something that varies based on circumstance. It's either given wholly or not at all." "Your mother sounds like a wise woman." "She was." A shadow crossed his face. "She passed on when I was 15. Influenza." I'm sorry, Daisy said sincerely. My own mother died when I was 12. My father followed 3 years later. Is that when you married? Zachary asked, then immediately shook his head. Forgive me, that's not my business. No, it's all right. Daisy found herself wanting to talk. To explain how she had ended up bloodied and alone on a cattle trail. I was 17 when Frank Miller came to town. He seemed kind, stable. My options were limited. I was staying with a distant aunt who made it clear I was a burden. Frank offered security, a home of my own. She gave a bitter laugh. The security was an illusion. The home became a prison. Zachary's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. And now? Now I'm headed to Pine Creek, and after that, I don't know. I have a little money saved. Perhaps I can find work, make my own way. It won't be easy, Zachary said, not unkindly. But you strike me as a woman of considerable strength, Miss Daisy. The unexpected compliment warmed her more than the fire. Just Daisy, please. And thank you, Mr. Blackwood. Zach, he corrected with a small smile. Mr. Blackwood was my father, and hearing it makes me look over my shoulder for him. Their conversation was interrupted by Tommy, who came to collect their empty plates. As the young man walked away, Zachary stood and stretched. We'll reach Pine Creek by midday tomorrow, he said. You should get some rest. Tommy's cleared space in the wagon for you to sleep. It's not the Fielding Hotel, but it's better than the ground. Daisy nodded, suddenly aware of how exhausted she was. Thank you, Zach, for everything. As she settled into the makeshift bed in the wagon, cushioned by empty grain sacks and covered with a clean wool blanket, Daisy listened to the night sounds of the campmen talking in low voices, horses nickering softly, the crackle of the dying fire. For the first time in years, despite the uncertainty of her future, she felt a measure of peace. The wagon lurched into motion at dawn, waking Daisy from a dreamless sleep. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her muscles and the throbbing pain of her bruises. Through a gap in the canvas covering, she could see Zachary riding alongside the cattle, occasionally calling out instructions to his men. There was a natural authority in his bearing, but none of the brutish dominance that had characterized Frank's interactions with others. Tommy turned to check on her. Morning, madam. There's coffee if you want it, and some leftover bread. Thank you, Tommy, Daisy said, accepting the tin cup he offered. The coffee was strong and bitter, but she welcomed its warmth. How long have you worked for Mr. Blackwood? Going on 2 years now, the boy replied proudly. Started when I was 15. Mr. Blackwood, he took me on when no one else would. Said I was too scrawny for ranch work, but he gave me a chance anyway. He seems to be a good man, Daisy observed, carefully keeping her tone neutral. The best, madam. Fair with his men, honest in his dealings, never seen him raise his hand to anyone who didn't deserve it, and even then, it's rare. Tommy glanced at her bruised face, then quickly away. Begging your pardon, madam, but whoever did that to you, well, Mr. Blackwood wouldn't stand for such treatment of a lady. Daisy said nothing, sipping her coffee as the wagon continued its steady progress across the rolling grassland. By mid-morning, she could see the distant outlines of buildings Pine Creek, a small but growing settlement that served as a hub for the surrounding ranches. As they drew closer to town, Zachary rode up alongside the wagon. We'll be stopping at the cattle pens by the railroad, he explained. From there, I can escort you wherever you need to go in town. Daisy considered her options. She had no specific destination in mind, just the vague hope of finding work and lodging. Is there a boarding house or hotel that might be suitable for a lady on her own? Mrs. Henderson runs a respectable boarding house on Elm Street, Zachary replied. She's a widow herself, takes in ladies looking for work or passing through. I can introduce you if you'd like. That would be very kind, Daisy said, grateful for his guidance. The cattle were delivered to the railroad pens without incident, and after settling accounts with the railroad agent, Zachary left his men to see to the horses while he escorted Daisy into town. Pine Creek was larger than Daisy had expected, a main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, a bank, a saloon, and what appeared to be a small hotel. Side streets branched off, populated with modest homes and businesses. Mrs. Henderson's boarding house was a two-story white clapboard structure with green shutters and a well-tended garden. The proprietress herself, a plump woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun, greeted them at the door with keen assessment in her eyes. "Mr. Blackwood," she acknowledged with a nod. "It's been some time since you've graced my doorstep. And who might this be?" "Mrs. Henderson, may I present Daisy Miller? She's new to Pine Creek and in need of lodging. I thought of your establishment immediately." The older woman's gaze lingered on Daisy's bruised face, but she made no comment on it. "I do have a room available, on the second floor overlooking the garden. The rate is $3 per week, meals included." Daisy did a quick calculation of her meager savings. It was more than she had hoped to spend, but with meals provided, it might allow her time to find employment. "That would be suitable, thank you," she said, reaching for her pouch of coins. "There's also the matter of references," Mrs. Henderson added, her expression softening slightly. "Though I imagine Mr. Blackwood can vouch for your character." Before Daisy could protest that she hardly knew the man, Zachary spoke up. "Miss Miller is of impeccable character, Mrs. Henderson. I can personally guarantee that." The landlady nodded, apparently satisfied. "Very well. Come in and I'll show you to your room. We serve breakfast at 7, dinner at noon, and supper at 6. No gentlemen callers in the rooms, and the doors locked at 10 each night." As Mrs. Henderson turned to lead the way inside, Daisy glanced at Zachary. "Thank you," she murmured. "You didn't have to do that." "It was no trouble," he replied quietly. "And entirely true, from what I've observed." In the small entryway of the boarding house, Daisy suddenly felt the weight of their impending separation. This man, who had shown her nothing but kindness and respect, would soon ride out of her life. She was once again facing an uncertain future alone. "Mr. Blackwood, Zach," she corrected herself. "I don't know how to properly thank you for your assistance." Zachary removed his hat, holding it in front of him. "No thanks necessary, Daisy. I'm just glad we happened along when we did." He hesitated, then added, "My ranch is about 10 miles west of town. If you ever need anything at all, you can send word through the general store. Mr. Finch knows how to reach me." Daisy nodded, touched by his continued concern. "I'll remember that." Mrs. Henderson cleared her throat pointedly from the staircase. "Miss Miller, if you're ready." With a final nod to Zachary, Daisy followed the landlady upstairs, acutely aware of his gaze following her until she disappeared from view. The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a chest of drawers, and a washstand. A single window overlooked a kitchen garden where late-season vegetables were still growing in neat rows. "Bathroom's at the end of the hall," Mrs. Henderson explained. "You share it with 2 other ladies. Towels are provided, but you'll need to supply your own soap." She paused, examining Daisy more carefully. "You appear to have had a difficult journey, Miss Miller. There's hot water if you'd like to refresh yourself before supper." "Thank you," Daisy said, suddenly conscious of her disheveled appearance. "That would be most welcome." When Mrs. Henderson had gone, Daisy sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed by the events of the past 24 hours. She had escaped one situation only to find herself in another unknown one. But at least here, in this quiet room with its clean sheets and solid door, she felt a measure of safety. After washing up and changing into her spare dress, a faded blue calico that had seen better days but was at least free of bloodstains, Daisy ventured downstairs for the evening meal. The dining room contained a long table where several women were already seated. They looked up with curious expressions as Daisy entered. "Ladies, this is Miss Miller, our newest resident," Mrs. Henderson announced. "Miss Miller, these are Miss Abigail Foster, a school teacher, Miss Sarah Jenkins, who works at the Mercantile, and Mrs. Eleanor Wright, who assists me with the housekeeping." Murmured greetings were exchanged as Daisy took an empty seat. The women were clearly curious about her bruised face, but they maintained a polite conversation throughout the simple but satisfying meal of roast chicken, potatoes, and greens. As they finished eating, Miss Foster, a woman perhaps a few years older than Daisy with intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, leaned forward. Are you planning to stay in Pine Creek long, Miss Miller? I hope to, Daisy replied cautiously. I need to find employment first. What sort of work do you do? Miss Jenkins asked. She was younger than Daisy, with a friendly, open face. I'm skilled at cooking and sewing, Daisy said. And I can read and write well enough. I'm willing to learn whatever is needed. Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening from her place at the head of the table, spoke up. The hotel is looking for a laundress, I believe, and Dr. Porter mentioned needing someone to help with his filing and appointments. Thank you, Daisy said, grateful for the information. I'll inquire at both places tomorrow. After supper, Daisy excused herself and returned to her room. As she prepared for bed, she found herself thinking of Zachary Blackwood, his quiet strength, his unexpected kindness. In her experience, men who showed gentleness often concealed darker natures, yet something told her that Zachary was genuine. Pushing such thoughts aside, Daisy focused on the more immediate concern of finding work. She couldn't afford to stay at the boarding house indefinitely, and she certainly couldn't return to Frank. Whatever came next, she was determined to make her own way. The following morning, after a hearty breakfast of oatmeal and biscuits, Daisy set out to explore Pine Creek and inquire about employment. The hotel manager, a harried-looking man with ink-stained fingers, informed her that the laundress position had been filled just yesterday. Disappointed but undeterred, Daisy made her way to Dr. Porter's office. The doctor, a kindly gentleman with gray at his temples, studied her face with professional interest. Those bruises are healing well, he observed. No dizziness or blurred vision? No, sir, Daisy replied, caught off guard by his directness. Good, good. He leaned back in his chair. Mrs. Henderson mentioned you might be inquiring about the position. Can you read and write clearly? Yes, sir. I completed 8 years of schooling. More than adequate, Dr. Porter nodded. The work involves maintaining patient records, scheduling appointments, and occasionally assisting with simple medical tasks, cleaning wounds, changing bandages, that sort of thing. Nothing too complex. The pay is $12 a month, with Sundays off. Would that suit you? Daisy could hardly believe her luck. The position sounded perfect, respectable work with reasonable compensation. Yes, sir, that would suit me very well. Excellent. Can you start tomorrow? 9 o'clock sharp. I'll be here, Daisy promised, unable to keep the smile from her face despite the pain it caused her healing lip. As she left the doctor's office, Daisy felt a weight lift from her shoulders. With steady employment, she could afford her lodging and begin to build a new life. Perhaps in time, she might even save enough to move on to a larger town where Frank would never think to look for her. The next few weeks passed in a pleasant routine. Daisy found the work at Dr. Porter's office challenging but rewarding. The doctor was a fair employer who valued her efficiency and quick learning. The boarding house provided comfortable accommodation and the company of the other women who had gradually accepted Daisy into their circle. Her bruises faded, and with them, some of the fear that had been her constant companion. She still started at loud noises and kept a careful eye on strangers in town, but the bone-deep terror began to recede. In its place grew a cautious optimism about her future. One crisp November morning, as Daisy was organizing patient files in the doctor's front office, the door opened to admit a familiar figure. Zachary Blackwood stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, looking somewhat out of place in the medical setting. Good morning, he said, seeming as surprised to see her as she was to see him. Daisy, Miss Miller. I didn't realize you worked here. Mr. Blackwood, Daisy acknowledged, her heart inexplicably racing. Yes, Dr. Porter hired me shortly after we arrived in town. Are you here to see the doctor? One of my men took a fall from his horse, Zachary explained. Nothing broken, but the cut on his arm isn't healing properly. Daisy nodded, opening the appointment book. Dr. Porter can see him now if you'd like to bring him in. He's between patients. He's tying up the horses, Zachary said, still standing awkwardly in the doorway. You look well, he added after a moment. Pine Creek seems to agree with you. It does, Daisy confirmed. I'm grateful for your guidance in finding Mrs. Henderson's boarding house. It's been a comfortable home these past weeks. Before Zachary could respond, the door opened again to admit a younger cowboy with his arm wrapped in a none-too-clean bandage. Daisy immediately shifted to her professional role, ushering the injured man to the examination room and informing Dr. Porter of the new patient. As she returned to the front office, she found Zachary still waiting, examining a medical illustration on the wall with apparent interest. "Your man is being seen to," she told him. "Dr. Porter says it shouldn't take long." "Thank you." Zachary turned from the illustration. "I was wondering, I thought I might ask if you'd consider—" He stopped, cleared his throat, and started again. "Would you allow me to call on you properly? Perhaps this Sunday, if you're free?" The unexpected invitation caught Daisy off guard. "Call on me?" "For dinner," Zachary clarified, a flush rising above his collar. "At the hotel restaurant. I understand if you'd prefer not to—" "No, yes," Daisy interrupted, flustered by her own confusion. "I would like that, Mr. Blackwood. Zach." The smile that spread across his face transformed his features, softening the lines carved by sun and wind. "Sunday at noon, then. I could meet you at the boarding house?" "That would be fine," Daisy agreed, aware of the warmth in her own cheeks. When Sunday arrived, Daisy found herself spending an unusual amount of time on her appearance. Her wardrobe was limited, but she had purchased a new ribbon for her hair with her first wages, and Mrs. Wright had kindly loaned her a shawl of soft blue wool that complemented her best dress. Mrs. Henderson raised an eyebrow when Daisy informed her of the lunch engagement. "Mr. Blackwood is a respected rancher," the landlady said with approval. "A good man, by all accounts, though he keeps to himself mostly. His ranch is doing well from what I hear." "It's just lunch," Daisy said, embarrassed by the older woman's obvious matchmaking. "He was kind to me when I arrived in town, nothing more." "Of course, dear," Mrs. Henderson replied with a knowing smile that made Daisy blush all over again. Zachary arrived promptly at noon, dressed in what was clearly his Sunday best, a clean white shirt, dark vest, and pressed trousers. His hair was neatly combed, and he had trimmed his beard since Daisy had last seen him. "You look lovely," he said simply as she descended the stairs to meet him. "Thank you," Daisy replied, acutely aware of Mrs. Henderson watching from the parlor doorway. "Shall we go?" The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Pine Creek, which wasn't saying much by big city standards, but represented luxury in the frontier town. White cloths covered the tables, and a piano player in the corner provided gentle background music. As they were seated at a table by the window, Daisy felt a momentary panic. What was she doing here? She had sworn off men, hadn't she? Escaped one marriage only to consider another? "Are you all right?" Zachary asked, noticing her discomfort. Daisy forced a smile. "Yes, it's been some time since I dined in such a nice establishment." Zachary's expression suggested he didn't entirely believe her, but he didn't press the issue. Instead, he began telling her about recent happenings at his ranch, a new colt born to his prized mare, the expansion of his cattle herd, plans for building a larger barn come spring. As the meal progressed, Daisy found herself relaxing. Zachary was easy to talk to, genuinely interested in her opinions, and refreshingly devoid of the kind of patronizing attitude she had come to expect from men. When she mentioned her growing responsibilities at Dr. Porter's office, he listened attentively, asking intelligent questions about her work. "The doctor says I have a natural aptitude for medical matters," Daisy told him, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "He's begun teaching me more about treating common ailments. Last week I set a broken finger all by myself." "That's impressive," Zachary said, and she could tell he meant it. "You found your place here quickly." "I suppose I have," Daisy agreed, surprised by the realization. "Pine Creek already feels more like home than—" She trailed off, not wanting to mention Frank or the years of misery. "Than your previous situation," Zachary finished for her tactfully. "I'm glad of it. You deserve peace and purpose, Daisy." The simple statement, delivered with such conviction, brought unexpected tears to her eyes. Daisy blinked them away, focusing on her plate. "Tell me more about your ranch," she said, changing the subject. "It sounds like a beautiful place." "It's modest compared to some spreads," Zachary admitted, "but it's mine, free and clear. My father started it with just 20 acres and a dream. I've expanded to nearly 200 acres now. with plans for more if the railroad continues to buy my beef at fair prices. You must be very proud of what you've accomplished. I am, Zachary acknowledged, but it can be a lonely life at times. The men are good company, but they're employees, not family. He hesitated, then added more quietly, I've been thinking lately that it's time to consider the future, what kind of legacy I want to leave, who I want to share it with. The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to address it directly. Instead, they finished their meal with lighter conversation about the town's upcoming Thanksgiving celebration and the unusually mild autumn weather. As they walked back to the boarding house afterward, Zachary tentatively offered his arm. After a moment's hesitation, Daisy placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of the solid strength beneath the fabric of his coat. At the boarding house steps, they paused. Thank you for a lovely afternoon, Daisy said formally, suddenly shy. The pleasure was mine, Zachary replied. I'd like to see you again, if you're willing. Daisy considered his request. Despite her reservations, she had enjoyed his company immensely. And yet, the memory of Frank's initial charm, which had concealed his true nature for so long, gave her pause. I'd like that too, she said finally. But Zach, I need to be honest. My experience with marriage has left me cautious. I'm not sure I'm ready to consider anything beyond friendship right now. Zachary nodded, his expression serious. I understand, Daisy, and I respect your caution. Friendship is a fine place to start, if you're willing to start at all. His acceptance of her boundaries, offered without resentment or pressure, reassured Daisy more than any protestation of feeling could have. Then yes, I would be happy to see you again. Perhaps next Sunday, Zachary suggested. If the weather holds, we could take a ride out to the lake. It's pretty this time of year, with the trees changing color. That sounds wonderful, Daisy agreed, already looking forward to it. As Zachary took his leave, tipping his hat with a warm smile, Daisy felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in years, hope, not just for survival, but for happiness. Over the following weeks, Daisy and Zachary's Sunday outings became a regular fixture in both their lives. They rode to the lake as planned, walked through the pine forests surrounding the town, and once ventured to a neighboring settlement for a harvest festival. With each meeting, Daisy's trust in Zachary deepened, as did her affection for him. November gave way to December, bringing colder weather and preparations for Christmas. The boarding house was festooned with evergreen boughs and red ribbons, and the ladies spent evenings making decorations from paper and dried fruits. Despite the growing festive atmosphere, Daisy found herself battling moments of melancholy. This would be her first Christmas away from the home she had shared with Frank, however unhappy that home had been. On the Sunday before Christmas, Zachary invited Daisy to visit his ranch. I'd like you to see it, he explained as they rode side by side on horses borrowed from the livery stable. To understand where I come from, what I've built. The Blackwood Ranch was indeed impressive, a sturdy main house built of logs and local stone, several well-maintained outbuildings, and a new barn under construction. Cattle grazed in the distance, and closer to the house, a kitchen garden was protected from the winter chill by canvas coverings. It's beautiful, Daisy said sincerely as Zachary helped her dismount. So peaceful. It's home, Zachary replied simply. Come inside, it's getting cold. The interior of the house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, colorful woven rugs, and a large stone fireplace that dominated the main room. A Christmas tree stood in one corner, modestly decorated with wooden ornaments and strings of dried berries. The men helped with the tree, Zachary explained, looking slightly embarrassed. They're not exactly known for their decorating skills. I think it's charming, Daisy assured him, touched by the effort. In the kitchen, Zachary prepared coffee, while Daisy explored the living areas of the house. On the mantelpiece, she found several framed photographs, an older couple who must be his parents, a younger Zachary in uniform, and a group of cowboys gathered around a campfire. You fought in the war, Daisy observed when Zachary returned with 2 steaming cups. Union cavalry, he confirmed, From 63 to 65. Not something I talk about much. Daisy nodded, understanding the reluctance many veterans showed to discuss their experiences. My father fought as well. He came home changed. We all did, Zachary said quietly. But that's the past. I prefer to look forward now. He handed her a cup. I have something for you. An early Christmas gift. From his pocket he withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. It's nothing elaborate, he added quickly. Just something I thought you might like. Daisy carefully unwrapped the package to reveal a small leather-bound book. Opening it, she found blank pages of fine quality paper. A journal? You mentioned that you enjoy writing, Zachary explained. I thought you might like a place to record your thoughts, your new beginnings. The thoughtfulness of the gift brought tears to Daisy's eyes. It's perfect, she whispered. Thank you, Zach. They spent the afternoon talking by the fire, sharing stories of their childhoods and dreams for the future. As the winter daylight began to fade, Zachary reluctantly acknowledged that they should start back to town before dark. I'd like you to come for Christmas dinner, he said as they rode. The men who don't have family nearby will be here, and Mrs. Figgins from town comes to cook. It's become something of a tradition. I'd like that very much, Daisy replied, warmed by the invitation. Christmas Day dawned clear and cold. After attending the morning church service with the other boarding house residents, Daisy returned to her room to change for dinner at the ranch. She had used some of her savings to purchase a new dress for the occasion, a deep green wool that complemented her auburn hair. Mrs. Henderson stopped her in the hallway, pressing a small wrapped package into her hands. For you, dear. From all of us ladies. Inside the package, Daisy found a beautiful crocheted shawl in cream-colored wool. It's lovely, she said, genuinely touched. Thank you. You've become like family to us, Mrs. Henderson said, patting her arm. Now go enjoy your Christmas with that handsome rancher of yours. He's not my, Daisy began, then stopped herself. What exactly was Zachary to her? More than a friend, certainly, but they had never formally defined their relationship. Zachary arrived to escort her to the ranch in a sleigh rather than on horseback, the runners making a pleasant swishing sound over the light covering of snow that had fallen overnight. Bells jingled from the harness, and thick blankets provided warmth against the chill. You look beautiful, he said as he helped her into the sleigh, his admiration evident in his gaze. Thank you, Daisy replied, settling the new shawl around her shoulders. And thank you for including me in your Christmas celebration. The ranch house was transformed when they arrived, filled with light and laughter. 6 of Zachary's men were present, all dressed in their Sunday best, along with Mrs. Figgins, a widow who occasionally cooked for special events in town. The men greeted Daisy with respectful nods, though she caught a few exchanging knowing glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Dinner was a festive affair, roast goose with all the trimmings, followed by Mrs. Figgins's famous apple pie. The cowboys regaled Daisy with tales of ranch life, some clearly embellished for her entertainment. Through it all, she was conscious of Zachary watching her, a warm contentment in his eyes that made her heart beat faster. After the meal, one of the men produced a fiddle and another a harmonica. Impromptu dancing began in the cleared space of the main room, with Mrs. Figgins proving surprisingly light on her feet for a woman of her size. Would you care to dance? Zachary asked, offering his hand to Daisy. She hesitated only briefly before accepting. I should warn you, I'm not very practiced. Neither am I, he admitted with a laugh. We can be unpracticed together. As they moved around the room to a lively reel, Daisy felt a joy she had almost forgotten existed. Zachary's hand at her waist was respectful, his steps careful to match hers. When the music changed to a slower waltz, he drew her slightly closer, and she did not pull away. I have something to tell you, he said quietly, his voice for her ears alone. I've received an offer for a significant cattle contract with the Army. It would mean expanding the ranch, building a bigger operation. That's wonderful news, Daisy said sincerely. You've worked hard for such an opportunity. It is, Zachary agreed. But it would also mean more responsibility, more hands to manage. He hesitated, then continued. I've been thinking about what that means for my future, for the kind of life I want to build. Daisy felt her pulse quicken at the seriousness in his tone. And what kind of life is that? The music ended before he could answer, and they were separated as the Cowboys insisted on teaching Daisy a group dance that involved much stomping and clapping. By the time she had a moment alone with Zachary again, it was growing late, and Mrs. Figgins was preparing to return to town. I should take you back as well, Zachary said, though his reluctance was evident. Mrs. Henderson's curfew. The ride back to town was quieter than their journey out, a comfortable silence between them as the sleigh glided through the darkness. Stars glittered overhead in the clear winter sky, and their breath formed small clouds in the frosty air. At the boarding house steps, Zachary helped Daisy down from the sleigh, his hands lingering at her waist slightly longer than necessary. Thank you for coming today, he said. Having you there, it made the day special. I enjoyed every moment, Daisy replied honestly. Your home is wonderful, Zach. Warm and welcoming, just like its owner. In the silvery light of the full moon, Zachary's expression grew serious. Daisy, what I was trying to say earlier, I've come to care for you deeply these past months. I know you said you needed time, and I respect that. But I want you to know that my feelings for you are real and true. Daisy's heart seemed to stop, then race ahead. Part of her wanted to retreat from the declaration, to protect herself from the vulnerability that came with such feelings. But a stronger part recognized the sincerity in Zachary's words and the answering emotion in her own heart. I care for you too, Zach, she admitted softly. More than I thought possible, but I'm still sometimes afraid of making another mistake, of losing myself again. Zachary nodded, reaching out to gently take her hand. I understand. And I'll wait, Daisy, for as long as you need. I just wanted you to know where I stand. Looking up into his earnest face, Daisy made a decision. Rising on tiptoe, she pressed a light kiss to his cheek. Merry Christmas, Zach, she whispered. His smile was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. Merry Christmas, Daisy. The new year brought changes to Pine Creek. The railroad announced plans to establish a more permanent station, attracting businesses and settlers to the growing town. Dr. Porter's practice flourished, keeping Daisy busier than ever, and Zachary, true to his word, began preparations for expanding his ranch to meet the requirements of the Army contract. They continued to see each other regularly, their relationship deepening with each meeting. Zachary was patient, never pressing for more than Daisy was ready to give, but his feelings were evident in every look, every gesture. By February, Daisy had saved enough money to rent a small cabin on the edge of town. It wasn't much, 2 rooms with a pot-bellied stove and a hand pump for water, but it was hers alone, a symbol of her independence that she cherished. Zachary helped her move her few belongings from the boarding house, then stayed to make sure the stove was working properly and the roof didn't leak. As they sat drinking coffee at her small table afterward, Daisy felt a sense of rightness, of coming home, that had nothing to do with the cabin and everything to do with the man across from her. I like it here, Zachary said, looking around the simple space. It suits you. It's not much compared to your ranch, Daisy replied with a smile. It's perfect because it's yours, he said simply. You've built this life for yourself, Daisy. I admire that more than I can say. In that moment, looking at him across her own table in her own home, Daisy felt the last of her reservations begin to crumble. This man, with his quiet strength and unfailing respect, had shown her what love could and should be. Zach, she began, her voice steadier than she expected, I've been thinking about what you said at Christmas, about your feelings for me. He set down his cup, giving her his full attention. Yes? I'm not afraid anymore, Daisy said. Or rather, I am, but not of you. Never of you. Zachary reached across the table to take her hand, his expression cautiously hopeful. What are you saying, Daisy? I'm saying that I love you, she answered, the words both frightening and freeing. And that if you still feel the same way, I'm ready to explore what that might mean for us. The joy that blazed across Zachary's face was answer enough, but he rose from his chair and came around the table, kneeling beside her. "I love you, Daisy Miller. I have since that day on the trail when you held your head high, despite everything you'd been through. You're the strongest, most beautiful soul I've ever known." He took both her hands in his. "I'm not asking for promises or commitments yet, just the chance to court you properly, to build something together that honors who we both are." Daisy felt tears of happiness well in her eyes. "I'd like that very much." As winter gave way to spring, Daisy and Zachary's courtship became the talk of Pine Creek. They attended church functions together, shared Sunday dinners, and worked side by side when Zachary brought cattle to market in town. Daisy continued her work at Dr. Porter's office, growing more skilled in medical matters with each passing week. In late March, as the first wildflowers began to appear in the meadows around town, Zachary invited Daisy for a picnic by the lake where they had first started their courtship. The day was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of pine and new growth. After they had eaten, Zachary grew unusually quiet, fidgeting with a twig he had picked up from the ground. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about the future, about us." Daisy felt a flutter of anticipation. "What about us?" "The ranch expansion is going well," he continued, seemingly off topic. "The new barn is finished, and I've hired 3 more hands to help with the increased herd." "That's wonderful," Daisy said, puzzled by his nervousness. "I've also started building a new house," Zachary added, still not meeting her eyes. "Nothing fancy, but solid. 3 bedrooms, a proper kitchen, a study, room to grow." Understanding began to dawn on Daisy. "Zach, are you asking me something?" Finally, he looked up, resolve replacing uncertainty in his gaze. "Yes, I am, or I'm trying to, rather poorly." He took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "Daisy Miller, would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Opening the box, he revealed a simple but elegant ring with a small diamond set in gold. "It was my mother's," he explained. "My father gave it to her when they decided to start their life together in this wild country." Daisy stared at the ring, emotions washing over her in waves: joy, amazement, a touch of lingering fear, but mostly deep, abiding love for this man who had shown her what true partnership could be. "I know your first marriage was not what it should have been," Zachary continued, his voice gentle. "I want you to know that I see you as my equal in all things. Your dreams, your work with Dr. Porter. I would never ask you to give those up. I want to build a life with you, not take yours away." Tears spilled down Daisy's cheeks as she reached for his hand. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Zach, I will marry you." His hands trembled slightly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her all along. "I promise to love and respect you every day of our lives," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as fiercely as my own." "And I promise the same," Daisy replied, leaning forward to seal their engagement with a kiss that spoke of hope, of healing, of a future brighter than either could have imagined alone. The wedding took place in May, when the wildflowers were at their peak. The entire town of Pine Creek seemed to turn out for the occasion, the small church overflowing with well-wishers. Daisy wore a dress of ivory silk that Mrs. Henderson and the other boarding house ladies had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a traditional veil. Dr. Porter gave her away, having become something of a father figure during her time working with him. Zachary waited at the altar, his expression a mixture of awe and adoration as Daisy walked toward him on the doctor's arm. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, their vows spoken clearly for all to hear. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up from the congregation could likely be heard all the way to the next town. The celebration afterward, held at the ranch under a canopy of trees strung with lanterns, continued well into the evening. Daisy danced with her new husband until her feet ached, then sat beside him at the head table, accepting congratulations and good wishes from friends and neighbors. "Are you happy, Mrs. Blackwood?" Zachary asked quietly during a rare moment alone. "More than I ever thought possible," Daisy replied honestly, leaning against his shoulder. "And you?" "I have everything I could ever want right here," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. As the last guests departed and the ranch hands tactfully made themselves scarce, Zachary led Daisy to the new house he had built for them. It stood a short distance from the original ranch house, which would now serve as accommodation for the foreman and as extra space when needed. "Welcome home," Zachary said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold in the traditional manner. Inside, the house was simply but beautifully furnished, with polished wood floors and large windows that would fill the rooms with light during the day. A fire was already burning in the stone hearth, casting a warm glow over the main room. "It's perfect," Daisy breathed, taking in the home they would share. "Truly perfect." That night, as they lay together in the new bed that would be theirs for years to come, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the terror of that blood-soaked night when she had fled Frank's cruelty, to the uncertain steps toward independence in Pine Creek, to the deep and abiding love she had found with Zachary, it was a path she could never have imagined. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, his fingers gently tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "About how far I've come," Daisy replied. "About how sometimes the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures." Zachary pulled her closer, his heartbeat steady and reassuring against her cheek. "We'll build that future together, one day at a time." As she drifted toward sleep in the safety of her husband's arms, Daisy knew with absolute certainty that she had found not just a home, but a place to truly belong. Epilogue. 5 years later. The sound of children's laughter floated through the open windows of the Blackwood ranch house on a warm summer breeze. Daisy looked up from the medical text she was studying, a smile spreading across her face as she watched her 3-year-old daughter, Emma, chase a butterfly across the front yard, her dark curls bouncing with each step. From the barn came the deeper voices of Zachary and their 5-year-old son, James, engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about the merits of different types of horseshoes. James, with his mother's auburn hair and his father's steady gaze, nodded solemnly at whatever wisdom Zachary was imparting. Setting aside her book, Daisy rose from her chair on the porch and walked toward the outdoor table where lunch was laid out. "Food's ready," she called. "Better come eat before it gets cold." The simple announcement triggered a flurry of activity, Emma abandoning her butterfly chase, James racing his father from the barn, both children arriving at the table slightly out of breath and pink-cheeked. "Wash your hands first," Daisy reminded them, nodding toward the basin she had prepared. As the children dutifully cleaned up, Zachary came to stand beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "Productive morning?" he asked, nodding toward the medical text on the porch. "Very," Daisy confirmed. "Dr. Porter believes I'm ready to handle more complex cases on my own. He's considering making me a partner in the practice." Pride shone in Zachary's eyes. "That's wonderful news, though I'm not surprised you've worked harder than anyone to learn the medical arts." Over the past 5 years, Daisy had continued her work with Dr. Porter, advancing from assistant to apprentice to what the doctor called his right hand. 3 days a week she rode into town to help at the practice, returning home in time for supper with her family. The arrangement allowed her to pursue her growing passion for medicine while still being present for the children and the ranch. Zachary, true to his word, had supported her ambitions from the start. When James was born, he had adjusted the ranch schedule to be more present while Daisy recovered. When she expressed interest in furthering her medical education, he had ordered books from back east and encouraged her studies. Their partnership, in life and in work, had grown stronger with each passing year. As they sat down to lunch, Daisy looked around at her family. James carefully cutting his own meat the way his father had taught him, Emma chattering about the butterfly's colors, Zachary listening to both with equal attention, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it brought tears to her eyes. "Mama, why are you crying?" Emma asked, her small face creasing with concern. Because I'm happy, sweetheart, Daisy explained, wiping away the moisture. Sometimes people cry when they're very, very happy. That's silly, James declared with the confidence of a 5-year-old. Maybe so, Zachary agreed, winking at Daisy across the table. But your mama is allowed to be silly sometimes. After lunch, while the children napped during the heat of the day, Daisy and Zachary sat together on the porch swing he had built for her last birthday. The ranch spread out before them, cattle grazing in the distance, fields of grass rippling in the wind. I had a letter from Mrs. Henderson yesterday, Daisy mentioned, leaning against her husband's shoulder. She says Pine Creek is growing so fast she hardly recognizes it. The railroad has brought 3 new businesses just this month. Progress, Zachary nodded. Can't stop it, I suppose, though I'm glad we're out here where things change more slowly. Daisy hummed in agreement. The Blackwood Ranch had expanded over the years, but they had been careful to preserve the peace and natural beauty that had first drawn them both to this place. Do you ever think about him? Zachary asked suddenly. Frank? The question surprised her. They rarely spoke of her first husband. Sometimes, Daisy admitted. Not often, and not with fear anymore. Just wondering if he ever changed or if he found someone else to mistreat. I heard he moved on to Montana Territory, Zachary said. One of the men in town mentioned it last market day. Apparently he remarried. Daisy sighed. I hope she's stronger than I was, or that he's learned to be a better man, though that seems unlikely. You were plenty strong, Zachary corrected gently. You walked away with nothing but the clothes on your back. That takes more courage than most people ever show. They sat in companionable silence for a while, the swing moving in a gentle rhythm. Daisy thought about how far she had come from that bloodied, terrified woman on the trail. Now she was Dr. Porter's trusted associate, mother to 2 beautiful children, and wife to a man who treated her with unwavering respect and love. Do you remember that first day? She asked softly. When you found me on the trail? Every detail, Zachary confirmed. You were the most determined-looking woman I'd ever seen, despite everything. When you said you wouldn't cook for any man, I knew you were someone special. Daisy smiled at the memory. And yet I ended up cooking for you and your men that very night. By choice, Zachary emphasized. That's what I understood even then, the difference between service given freely and service demanded. When I said you'd never serve me, I meant it. Partners don't serve each other, they support each other. And we have, Daisy said, reaching for his hand, through everything. The sound of little feet pattering inside the house signaled the end of nap time. Within moments, Emma burst onto the porch, her hair tousled from sleep, James following more sedately behind her. Papa, you promised to show me the new foal, Emma reminded Zachary, climbing onto his lap without ceremony. So I did, he agreed, standing with his daughter in his arms. Would you like to come see her too, James? The boy nodded eagerly, already putting on the small hat that matched his father's. Coming. Mama? James asked, holding out his hand to Daisy. Taking her son's hand, Daisy rose from the swing. I wouldn't miss it for the world. As they walked toward the barn together, a family bound by love and respect rather than obligation or fear, Daisy reflected on the journey that had brought her here. From the darkest moment of her life had come the greatest blessing she could imagine, not just escape from cruelty, but the discovery of her own strength, a fulfilling vocation, and a love that empowered rather than diminished her. The cowboy who had once told her she would never serve him had kept his word in ways neither of them could have foreseen that day on the trail. Together, they had built not just a home or a family, but a life of shared purpose and mutual support, a true partnership that honored who they both were, separately and together. And in that partnership, Daisy had found not just safety, but the freedom to become fully herself.